you want me to just say something about the other points as well?
Go for it.
So norm is the second point, and it's this idea that is there a way to live? We all have rules that we live by. Now, I'm not here just talking about the Ten Commandments. I'm talking about any kind of rule that we have or norm that tells us there's a standard that we have to meet. So in the book, a friend of mine walked into a shop. The lady asked the shop owner, "Are your straws paper or plastic?" Mm-hmm. The lady said, "Paper." And the person said, "Oh, I'm so glad I can drink here." So for them, the norm is you need to have paper straws so I can drink here. It's a norm. Why was there so much confusion or interpretation over when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock? The problem there was everyone disagreed on the norm as to whether that was a good thing, a chivalrous thing, a bad thing, a terrible thing, a wonderful thing, because the norms are completely different. And even subcultures that try to go against the normal norm have their own rules. So in the book, I talk about goths. A friend of mine was a goth, and apparently they have their own rules. They have to not conform in the same way. And so norm is this idea that we all have standards, but where do those standards come from? And what happens when we fail them, which then leads on to the third magnetic point, which is deliverance, which is the idea that we know that there's something wrong with the world, and but what's the answer to be delivered from it? And again, the problem is people can't agree on what the problem is, let alone what the solution is. And that's just not that's not just looking forward. That's a looking back to a time when, in your context, America was better then. It's a kind of, it can be very seen, deliverance can be seen in nostalgia. If only we could go back to there then. And of course, people, you can talk about deliverance at a big level in terms of we all struggle with the issue of death or what's going to happen when we die. And lots of people, again, COVID brought that up in terms of people talking about that. But deliverance is also talking about mini deliverances for normal people. How do I get through the day without another drink? How do I get to the end of the week? And the deliverance for me is partying on the weekend. There's this idea that the world isn't as it should be. And what's the solution to that? And then the fourth magnetic point is destiny. And this is my kind of favorite magnetic point. Bavinck has this great line. He says, we both lead our lives and undergo our lives at the same time. So destiny is this idea that, on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I think I'm the master of my own destiny. I can do it. No one's going to tell me what to do. I'm free. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I'm just a pawn in someone else's chess game. I'm a puppet on a string. I've got no agency. And Bavinck says we kind of like flip-flop between these two views. And again, you can have that at a very philosophical level, but also at a very mundane level. In the book, I talk about superstition, and people have lots of superstitions because we want to know that there is some kind of control, but at the same time, we still want to do what we want to do. And I mean, recently, I think this has come home to me, especially talking with students, and this has resonated a bit when I've done stuff in the States. So, for example, I spoke to a group of students here. These are very, very secular, non-Christian students here. And I spoke to some Christians who were talking about their friends on a university mission. And the first thing they were dealing with, the students, there's this big rage called manifesting, where people literally think they can bring reality into existence by just thinking about it. So a friend of this friend had said they wanted a boyfriend that week, and they'd manifested using crystals, and a boyfriend had appeared. So it's literally, you can determine reality. But then the students in the campus I was working at were also dealing with this terrible spate of injection spiking. So some students had died, like date rape drugs, and a lot of the students were boycotting the nightclubs because they were in fear. So you've got this kind of, we've got no control, but then we're thinking that we can manifest reality. It's that kind of dissonance. And then I think the third thing, which was really telling, and again, I think the point I'm making here the big mental illness crisis that we're facing in the UK, especially amongst students. This doesn't completely explain it, but I think it says something. A lot of students have said to me, we've been told from an early age that we were the generation that had to change things. You know, the parents got it wrong. This is your chance. You need to make things different, whether that's dealing with the environment or social issues or whatever. And they've been told, this is your expectation. You need to change it. You can change it. And then these students get to university and college and they realize in the first few weeks, we can't change anything. And the kind of the disillusionment and the despondency, I think, is really hard, because they've been told you can change the world. And then they realize, I can't even pay for my courses. I've got no agency. The man is in control. And I think that kind of tension, it's interesting though, Travis, I did some of this material in Pittsburgh, where I hadn't realized that Pittsburgh has a lot of these kind of high tech, Ivy League people who are going to do medical research.
Yeah.
And I was talking to a professor at a church there. He said, I think that's true of a lot of students. The students that he deals with literally could change the world, but they're paralyzed then just because they could, should they? So it kind of works both ways. And I think different cultures and different countries have different ways of dealing with destiny. I think in the part of the American dream, if I may say, is one of the frontier. It's pushing forward. It's we can, it's the kind of almost the manifest destiny kind of idea. Whereas I've spoken in other cultures in contexts where they're countries that have been often historically occupied by other people, and it's a very different attitude, spirit. We're always the last. We're always the little runts. And I think those are important apologetically, as we're trying to understand, wandering around the objects of worship, what's the psyche of a country. And I think it's interesting. In England, we've been going through an identity crisis for a long time. What does it mean to be English? I just wonder, in my lifetime, I think America's going through an identity crisis that it hasn't had, in my understanding, because 30 years ago, I think people understood what it meant to be an American. And now, because of all the things that have happened, you're starting to question that a bit more, which is where this destiny point comes in. And then, the final magnetic point is higher power. And it's not simply do people believe in God or not, because I think in our kind of secular context, it's recognizing that there's been 2,000 years of Christian influence in the West anyway, but it's what I call secularized experiences. Was John Lennon right when he said in Imagine, above us is only sky? Or is there something out there, not necessarily God as we would understand God, but do we believe that there's something beyond? And so this idea of secularized religious experience or spirituality, I suppose. I mean, in the brilliant book that was written since my book, Tara Isabella Burton's book called Strange Rites, she talks about this category called the nuns, which a lot of Americans would identify as. Increasingly, they don't have any, but a lot of those nuns would still say they are spiritual, and they're what she calls they're kind of the remixed religious, who believe in something. They're not atheists, but they can't, it's some kind of spirituality. And I think the higher power, as we talk about connection and norm and deliverance and destiny, we start to ask those questions. And I think that's the big difference between our context and Bavinck's context. When Bavinck's in Indonesia, everyone believes in a higher power. The question is, what is the god or gods or pantheon of gods that can give connection, norm, deliverance, destiny? In our context, increasingly, the higher power is the thing that's we need to excavate, because people aren't thinking about is there a God? But the way that they're answering the questions of connection, norm, deliverance, and destiny, that always pushes to that question. Well, what is it, or who is it that connects us? Where do my norms come from? Who can deliver us? Is it going to be someone outside, or is it myself? Who is in control? Is it fate? Is there some power that's making me do things, or do I have freedom? And that's where you push in to ask that question of the way beyond. So all of those magnetic points, don't compartmentalize them. They're all kind of aspects on the one person, but I think they're helpful as a kind of they're tools or a framework or a scaffold for us to try and get this traction with people who ordinarily would say, don't give me your Jesus or Christianity, I'm not interested. But we need to help them to see that they are living very religious lives in the way they answer these questions.